Imagine this, in the smoke and chaos of America's bloodiest battles, while heroes fall and nations fracture, a hidden engine hums in the shadows, churning out fortunes that echo through generations. Not from chance or innovation, but from the very contracts that fuel the fight. 5 wars, 5 dynasties, billions siphoned from the public purse. What if I told you this isn't ancient history? It's a blueprint still active today, a financial machine disguised as patriotism. Buckle up. I'm about to pull back the curtain on the war profiteers who built empires on gunpowder, oil, loans, and logistics. And trust me, once you see the pattern, you'll never look at the evening news the same way. Let's begin at the dawn of this relentless cycle, where ambition meets opportunity in the raw forge of a young nation. Picture 1800. America, fresh from its revolution, teetering on the edge of expansion and endless skirmishes. Enter Eleuthère Irénée Dupont, a French émigré with a chemist's precision and a gambler's instinct. He flees the turmoil of post-revolutionary France, where he'd honed his skills in royal gunpowder mills, and lands on America's shores. Why here? Because he spots the powder keg waiting to ignite. A sprawling frontier hungry for explosives to blast rocks, clear forest, and arm militias. In 1802, on the banks of the Brandywine River in Delaware, a spot chosen for its rushing waters to power the mills and its isolation to muffle the blasts, he establishes the DuPont Company. It's no quaint startup. It's a calculated bet on violence as the ultimate growth sector. Fast forward to 1812, and the drums of war beat again. Britain provokes, America responds, and suddenly the U.S. government is desperate for gunpowder. DuPont, with mills already humming, steps in like a shadow broker. Their first major contract isn't just a deal, it's a template. Explosives flow to the front lines, production ramps up, and when the Treaty of Ghent ends the fray, DuPont doesn't pack up. They keep the factories, the know-how, the connections, profits, a tidy sum that funds expansion. But this is just the overture. By the Mexican-American War of 1846, DuPont's reputation precedes them. Artillery shells and musket charges owe their boom to DuPont black powder, netting over $1 million, equivalent to tens of millions today. It's not the cash alone that cements their grip. It's the trust. Governments don't switch suppliers mid-crisis. You're in, you're indispensable. Now, the stakes skyrocket. The Civil War erupts in 1861, tearing the nation in two. The Union Army devours gunpowder like a beast in famine. Millions of pounds for cannons that roar across Gettysburg and Antietam. DuPont's mills blaze nonstop, churning out 4 million pounds in peak years, raking in over $10 million. Adjust for inflation, and that's hundreds of millions pouring into family coffers. But here's the twist that chills the spine. The DuPonts, staunch Northern Democrats, privately scorned abolition. Some kin even whispered sympathies for the Confederacy. Yet ideology? Irrelevant. They supplied the Union exclusively, where the contracts flowed thickest, while turning a blind eye to the moral quagmire. Post-war, they're hailed as saviors, their complexities buried under layers of myth. The infrastructure endures, primed for the next thunder. As the 20th century dawns, World War I catapults DuPont from powerhouse to legend. Even before U.S. boots hit European mud in 1917, they're shipping TNT and smokeless powder to Allied powers. Britain and France pay premium for the edge. When America joins, the floodgates open. Production surges tenfold. By armistice, DuPont's war-related revenues hit the stratosphere. Smokestacks belch day and night, and the family fortune swells, funding estates, philanthropy, and a chemical empire that pivots seamlessly to peacetime plastics. But they never forget the cycle. World War II, DuPont dominates nylon for parachutes, synthetic rubber for tires, and explosives that level Berlin. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf Wars, each conflict a reprint of the playbook. From 1802 to Iraq in 2003, that's over 2 centuries of unbroken war dividends. Their assets? Billions today woven into everything from Teflon to universities bearing their name. Yet DuPont is just the spark. The true inferno ignites when you layer in the fuel providers, the Rockefellers. John D. Rockefeller, that steely-eyed titan from upstate New York, didn't invent oil. He weaponized it. Born in 1839, he scrapes into Cleveland's refineries as a bookkeeper, but by the 1870s, he's swallowing competitors whole, birthing Standard Oil, a monopoly that squeezes the life from rivals with ruthless efficiency. Why does this matter to our war machine? Because conflict runs on black gold. No fuel, no tanks, no planes, no victory. The Civil War was Rockefeller's proving ground. As battles rage, he pivots his kerosene business to supply lamps and lubricants for the Union effort, quiet contracts that balloon his margins. But the real surge hits with the Spanish-American War in 1898. America storms Cuba and the Philippines. Ships and soldiers guzzle oil like never before. Standard Oil's tentacles reach every port, delivering refined petroleum at prices they dictate. Profits? Explosive. By World War I, Rockefeller's empire is the lifeblood of the Allied fleets. U.S. entry in 1917? A boon. Fuel contracts pour in, and Standard's refineries hum, producing the high-octane gasoline that powers the doughboys' dough. Antitrust suits try to break them in 1911, but war trumps law. Government exemptions keep the monopoly intact. World War II seals the dynasty. With Hitler blitzing Europe, America mobilizes, and Rockefeller heirs oversee an oil colossus feeding the arsenal of democracy. From Pearl Harbor to Normandy, every jeep, bomber, and tank sips Standard Oil derivatives. Post-war, the family splinters the trust into Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, but the control lingers. Korea? Fuel for MacArthur's push. Vietnam? Jet fuel for B-52s. The Gulf Wars and Afghanistan? Pipelines of profit, with Rockefeller bloodlines and boardrooms dictating terms. Over 160 years, they've monopolized wartime energy, turning scarcity into supremacy. Today, their foundations bankroll think tanks that shape policy, subtly steering toward resource grabs that smell suspiciously like future conflicts. But empires don't conquer alone. They need financiers. Enter J.P. Morgan, the Wall Street colossus whose name still evokes iron-fisted banking. Born John Pierpont Morgan in 1837 to a Connecticut dynasty of lenders, he inherits not just wealth, but a world view. War is the ultimate loan opportunity. Governments borrow big in crises. Banks like his collect with interest, often from both sides. The Spanish-American War of 1898 is Morgan's masterstroke. As Teddy Roosevelt charges up San Juan Hill, Morgan syndicates bonds to fund the U.S. Navy's expansion, millions in commissions, plus investments in steel for ships. He plays all angles, quietly lending to Spain, too, hedging bets like a poker shark. World War I, Morgan's firm becomes the government's fiscal arm. Before U.S. involvement, they float loans to Britain and France, over $1.5 billion secured against future repayments. When America declares war, Morgan handles Allied purchasing in the States, earning fees that stack billions in today's dollars. The Lusitania sinking? Not just tragedy. It's a Morgan-financed liner, priming public outrage for entry. By World War II, the Morgan banking web finances the Lend-Lease program, funneling billions to allies while U.S. factories gear up. They lend to foes indirectly through neutral channels, profiting from the chaos. Post-war, Morgan's influence morphs into J.P. Morgan Chase, but the pattern persists. Iraq loans, Afghan reconstruction bonds. From 1898 to the present, over a century of war financing. They don't just bankroll battles, they ensure outcomes, their vaults swelling as empires rise and fall. Political donations, rivers of cash to senators who vote for interventions. It's lending with a geopolitical twist, profit from peril. Now the plot thickens. As warfare evolves from muskets to missiles, new players emerge, but the old dynasties adapt. Lockheed Martin's lineage traces to the Wright brothers era, but its war profiteering ignites in World War I. Predecessors like the Glenn L. Martin Company craft biplanes for the skies over France, contracts that evolve into the P-38 Lightnings of World War II, shredding Axis fighters. From Pearl Harbor to Hiroshima, Lockheed's forebears deliver bombers and reconnaissance craft, their factories a hive of rivets and rivulets of taxpayer cash. Post-war, the Cold War arms race, a jackpot. Jet fighters for Korea, transports for Vietnam, stealth tech for the Gulf, over a century of unbroken defense deals. Today, F-35s costing billions per squadron keep the streak alive, with overruns that baffle accountants but delight shareholders. And then there's the logistics leviathan, Halliburton. Born in the oil fields of 1919, it booms under executives like Dick Cheney, who rises from Wyoming politician to vice president, steering policy with an insider's touch. World War II contracts for pipeline building in the Pacific, Halliburton's baptism. But the real windfall hits post-9/11. The war on terror? No bid deals for Iraq reconstruction, tens of billions in logistics from feeding troops to rebuilding oil infrastructure. Cost overruns? Legendary. Cheney, as CEO in the 90s, secures the framework. As VP, he greenlights the flood. 80 years of war supply chains turning battlefields into balance sheets. So what's the thread binding DuPont's blasts, Rockefeller's fuel, Morgan's loans, Lockheed's wings, and Halliburton's hauls? A symphony of surge. War declared, stocks spike. DuPont up 300% in World War II. Standard Oil triples in World War I. Morgan bonds yield fortunes. Contracts awarded in the dead of night. Profits balloon amid the fog of battle. When the guns fall silent, the money stays, reinvested in lobbying firms, campaign chests, think tanks that whisper _ quote _0 _ into policymakers' ears. They don't start wars outright. No, that's too crude. But through donations, Rockefellers fund hawks, Morgan's back interventions, revolving doors, Cheney from boardroom to situation room, and policy nudges. They cultivate the soil where conflicts bloom. Why does this matter now, in an era of drones and cyber shadows? Because the machine hums louder than ever. U.S. defense spending tops $800 billion annually, more than the next 10 nations combined. These dynasties' heirs sit on boards, endow chairs at Ivy Leagues that train the next generation of leaders and shape narratives through media arms. Afghanistan's end? Billions unaccounted, funneled through familiar channels. Tensions with China or Russia? Watch the stocks twitch. It's not conspiracy. It's capitalism's cold calculus. War as the gift that keeps giving. As I sift through these yellowed ledgers and declassified bids, a sobering truth emerges. While we mourn the fallen and tally the debts, a select few harvest the whirlwind. These families didn't just survive history's storms, they engineered the winds. 6 generations strong, their billions fund art museums and scholarships, masking the munitions beneath. But knowledge is the ultimate disruptor. Next time a drumbeat echoes, ask, Who's really winning? The soldiers in the trenches or the shadows pulling the strings? This is the untold ledger of America, the profit in the powder, the fortune in the fight. And it's far from over. Imagine this. In the smoke-filled boardrooms of early 20th century America, a handful of families didn't just survive the chaos of war, they orchestrated it into fortunes that echo through our economy today. What if I told you that the explosives blasting through battlefields, the oil fueling tanks across continents, and the loans propping up entire armies were all threads in a web woven by the same elite dynasties? We're pulling back the curtain on how DuPont, Rockefeller, and Morgan turned global conflicts into private empires and why their shadow still looms over your retirement account and the next headline war. Buckle up. This isn't history. It's the hidden blueprint of modern wealth. Let's start where the gun smoke cleared and the real empire building began. Picture the aftermath of World War I, those grim years when the world licked its wounds, but one family was just getting started. DuPont, the powder makers who'd armed the Allies like clockwork, didn't pack up their factories and call it a day. No, they poured those war chest profits, skyrocketing from a modest $5 million in net earnings in 1914 to a jaw-dropping $82 million by 1918, the equivalent of over $1 billion in today's money, straight into a bold pivot. That's a 1,600% surge in just 4 years, fueled by churning out 40% of the explosives that kept the Allied forces in the fight. They erected massive new plants, swelling their workforce by thousands, all while the rest of the nation reeled from rationing and loss. But here's the twist that keeps me up at night. They didn't hand that money back to a war-weary public or plow it into safer ventures. Instead, they funneled it into uncharted territories, chemicals that revolutionized industry, plastics that reshaped everyday life, synthetic fibers that became the backbone of modern manufacturing. It was a master stroke of reinvention, transforming battlefield gunpowder into a peacetime juggernaut. Yet, the military never fully left their rearview mirror. As storm clouds gathered over Europe again in the 1930s, DuPont was ready. World War II ignited another bonanza. They ramped up explosives production but went further, crafting nylon parachutes that rained from the skies over Normandy and diving deep into the atomic age with the Manhattan Project. I want you to visualize the Hanford site in Washington state, a sprawling, secretive complex humming with the glow of plutonium production. DuPont didn't just build it, they ran it under a sweetheart deal called, quote, one, every dollar spent on labs, workers, and raw materials, reimbursed by Uncle Sam, and on top, a fat, guaranteed profit margin. Zero risk for them. The government shouldered every gamble, every delay, every catastrophe. It was war, profiteering wrapped in patriotism, and it paid off handsomely. Fast forward through the shadows of the Cold War, and the pattern repeats like a grim refrain. The Korean Peninsula erupts in the 1950s. DuPont supplies the chemicals and materials to keep the front lines supplied. Vietnam's jungles in the 60s and 70s. Same story, with their products embedded in everything from Agent Orange components to basic munitions. Then the Gulf War's desert storms, Iraq's urban quagmires, Afghanistan's mountain ambushes. Decade after decade, DuPont, or the entities it spun off into specialized defense firms, kept the pipeline flowing. By the dawn of the new millennium, their defense arm had merged away into bigger conglomerates, but the roots ran deep. The DuPont family trusts, 6 generations removed from founder Eleuthère Irénée DuPont's gunpowder mills, still sit on an estimated $30 billion war chest. That's not inheritance. That's interest compounded on the blood and fire of history. Now shift your gaze to black gold. the lifeblood of every mechanized conflict since the steam age faded. Enter the Rockefellers, the oil barons who didn't just drill for wealth, they drilled into the arteries of global power. John D. Rockefeller launched Standard Oil in 1870, a ruthless machine that by the decade's end gobbled up 90% of America's refining capacity. This wasn't competition, it was conquest, a monopoly that antitrust laws would later try and fail to dismantle. But war turned that iron grip into an unbreakable stranglehold. Think back to 1898, the Spanish-American War, a brief, brutal spark that lit the fuse for America's imperial ambitions. The U.S. Navy had just swapped coal-belching boilers for oil-hungry engines in the 1890s, making petroleum not just desirable, but indispensable. Rockefeller's fleets of tankers slaked the thirst of battleships slicing through Caribbean waters. The conflict fizzled in months, but the lesson burned eternal. He who controls the fuel controls the fight. From there, the Rockefellers scaled up, their empire expanding like spilled crude. World War I marked the tipping point, the first clash where machines devoured oil like never before, tanks rumbling across no man's land, biplanes dogfighting in oily exhaust, supply trucks churning mud into rivers of black. Even after the 1911 breakup splintered Standard Oil into pieces like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron, all still under Rockefeller influence, these successors fed the American doughboys and their allied comrades. Contracts poured in, worth hundreds of millions as refineries worked overtime to distill aviation fuel and lubricants from raw crude. But let's uncover the darker vein here, the one that whispers of moral ambiguity in boardrooms. Unlike DuPont's one-sided allegiance, the Rockefellers played both ends. Standard Oil's German arm kept the Kaiser's war machine humming, selling fuel right up to the brink. Even after U.S. entry in 1917, shadowy trades funneled petroleum to the Central Powers via neutral ports, Switzerland, neutral ships, whatever it took. Legally, ironclad, thanks to the corporate veils separating entities. Ethically, a gray zone that minted the Rockefellers as America's richest clan. John D. became the globe's first billionaire, his family branching into banks, skyscrapers, and causes that burnished their name. Yet oil stayed the root, the dark vein pumping wealth. World War II amplified the stakes with Rockefeller heirs locking in exclusive fuel deals for the Allied cause. Again, cost-plus guarantees shielding them from torpedoes or market dips. But investigations cracked open a Pandora's box. Standard Oil of New Jersey, Exxon's forebear, faced scrutiny for dealings with the Axis. Through subsidiaries, they shared synthetic rubber patents with IG Farben, Hitler's chemical behemoth, tech that let Nazi tires roll longer and tanks prowl farther, even as bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. Senator Harry Truman's committee, pre-presidency, dug deep and declared it a sabotage of the Allied effort, prolonging the carnage. The verdict? Damning. The action? Nothing. Prosecutions evaporated because the war machine couldn't afford to pause for refueling. Probes shelved, contracts renewed, the machine rolled on. From Korea's frozen hills to Vietnam's napalm skies, the Gulf's fiery sands to endless patrols in Iraq and Afghanistan, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, all Rockefeller bloodlines, pumped the essence of war. Profits swelled so vast that by the 1970s, amid oil shocks and public outrage, the family quietly divested direct stakes to dodge the spotlight. Today, their fortune lingers at around $11 billion, a testament to oil bartered for battles, burned in engines that decided empires. And none of this firepower or fuel moves without the invisible force: money. Wars aren't won on empty coffers. They're bankrolled by those who lend without fear of default. Enter the Morgans, the financiers whose ledgers scripted a century of conflict. J.P. Morgan forged his dynasty in the 1870s, and by 1900, J.P. Morgan and Company stood as America's financial colossus, a vaulted fortress dictating the flow of capital. Morgan grasped an eternal truth. Belligerents borrow recklessly, rates be damned because surrender isn't an option. The Spanish-American War of 1898 offered the first taste. Morgan's loans greased the wheels for U.S. mobilization, modest sums that yielded tidy interest, and forged an unbreakable bond with Washington. Trust built, the stage set for bigger fires. Then came World War I, a cataclysm that dwarfed all before it. Governments drowning in debt turned to Morgan as savior and shark. The Allies, Britain, France, caught in the trench meat grinder, borrowed billions through Morgan's syndicate, floating bonds that funneled American dollars across the Atlantic for shells, ships, and soldiers. When the U.S. tipped into the fray in 1917, Morgan pivoted seamlessly, underwriting massive Liberty loans to arm the Yanks. It wasn't charity, it was calculus, interest compounding on the desperation of nations, profits insulated from the mud and mustard gas. Escalating the intrigue, Morgan's web extended beyond loans. They influenced policy, whispering in ears that shaped war bonds and industrial mobilizations. The House of Morgan didn't bet on victors. They banked on the war itself emerging richer as empires crumbled. Post-armistice, the family diversified into railroads, steel, and electricity, but the war finance template endured. Korea to Vietnam, Gulf to today, where modern Morgans like J.P. Morgan Chase underwrite defense contracts worth trillions. Why does this matter now in an era of drones and cyber skirmishes? Because these dynasties didn't vanish, they evolved. DuPont's chemicals underpin today's pharma giants. Rockefeller oil powers electric dreams masking fossil roots. Morgan banks steer global flows amid rising tensions. Ukraine, Taiwan, wherever the next flashpoint ignites. Their wealth, seeded in war, funds lobbies that perpetuate the cycle, ensuring conflicts never truly end. We're not just inheriting history, we're living its sequel, where a few families' wartime windfalls dictate peace's price. Reflect on this. In chasing profit from powder, petroleum, and paper promises, these titans revealed a brutal symmetry. The financial system thrives on fracture. As I sift through these archives, one question haunts. When the next war drums beat, who profits while the world pays? The answer, I fear, is woven into the very fabric of our economy. Stay vigilant. The boardrooms never sleep. Imagine this, in the shadowed corridors of power, where the clash of steel meets the rustle of banknotes, a single decision by a handful of bankers tipped the scales of history. As Europe erupted into the inferno of World War I, America stood on the sidelines, or so we were told. But behind the veil of neutrality, fortunes were forged in fire, and the seeds of endless conflict were sown not by generals but by lenders. What if I told you that the wars shaping our world weren't just about ideology or territory, but about a relentless cycle of debt that bankers like J.P. Morgan turned into empires? Buckle up, because I'm about to peel back the layers of this financial web, revealing how one man's loans didn't just fund battles, they scripted America's entry into the bloodiest century. Let's rewind to that fateful summer of 1914. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand lit the fuse, and Europe plunged into chaos. America, under President Woodrow Wilson, declared strict neutrality. No boots on the ground, no sides taken, It was a stance that echoed the isolationism of our founding fathers. But neutrality? That was a luxury the bankers couldn't afford. Enter J.P. Morgan, the titan of Wall Street, whose name alone evoked both awe and fear. He wasn't content to watch from afar. Morgan's bank stepped in as the lifeline for Britain and France, the Allied powers gasping for breath against the German onslaught. Picture the scene. British envoys slipping into New York's financial district, hats pulled low, carrying desperate pleas. Morgan didn't hesitate. From 1914 to 1917, his institutions funneled over $2 billion, equivalent to more than $50 billion in today's dollars, straight into the war chests of the Allies. This wasn't charity. It was a calculated gamble. The funds bought everything: artillery shells from American factories, grain to feed starving troops, ships to ferry them across the Atlantic. American industry boomed as orders poured in. Farmers in the heartland shipped wheat. Steel mills in Pittsburgh glowed red hot. The money flowed out from Morgan's vaults, only to loop back through U.S. companies, fattening profits on both shores. It was a closed circuit of commerce where Wall Street pulled the strings and Main Street reaped the whirlwind. But here's where the intrigue deepens, the hidden gears grinding beneath the surface. Those loans weren't just financial lifelines. They chained America to the war's outcome. By 1917, Britain and France were drowning in debt to Morgan's empire. Their default wasn't an option. It would trigger a domino collapse. Banks would fail, credit would freeze, and the U.S. economy, still fragile from the panic of 1907, would shatter like glass. Morgan himself had skin in the game. His firm held the notes, collateralized by Allied promises and American ingenuity. Neutrality became a farce. Whispers in Washington grew louder. If the Allies fell, so would we. German U-boats sinking merchant ships weren't just threats to lives, they were torpedoes aimed at Wall Street's ledgers. The escalation hit its peak in April 1917. Wilson, the idealist professor turned president, stood before Congress, his voice thundering about making the world safe for democracy. German aggression, unrestricted submarine warfare, it all rang true. But peel back the rhetoric, and you'll find the cold calculus of cash. Senator George Norris of Nebraska cut through the fog in the debate halls, his words a thunderclap. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, two, underscore, underscore, he voted nay, a lone voice in the wilderness, but the chamber erupted in ayes. War was declared not just for honor, but to safeguard the balance sheets. American doughboys shipped out to the trenches, their rifles bought with the very loans that dragged them there. And Morgan? His investments were now backed by Uncle Sam's might, the full faith and credit of the United States Navy patrolling the seas. The armistice in 1918 didn't end the profits. It amplified them. Germany, crushed and humiliated, was saddled with reparations under the Treaty of Versailles, billions in gold marks to compensate the victors. But the Allies, bled dry, turned to America to settle their tabs. Morgan, ever the orchestrator, wove a new tapestry of debt. In 1924, the Dawes Plan emerged from his bankers' drawing rooms, a financial sleight of hand that loaned Germany fresh billions to pay the Allies, who in turn funneled it back to U.S. creditors. Morgan skimmed fees at every junction, underwriting bonds, advising governments, collecting commissions like a spider spinning silk. Then came the Young Plan in 1929, another Morgan masterpiece, refinancing the mountain of war debt and netting millions more in fees just as the stock market crashed. It was a house of cards built on borrowed time, but for Morgan it was a vault of gold. This pattern? It wasn't a one-off. It was the blueprint. Fast forward to the storm clouds of World War II. Europe trembled again as Hitler's blitzkrieg swallowed nations. America clung to isolationism, but Morgan's successors, now woven into the fabric of larger institutions, were already moving pieces. Before Pearl Harbor shattered the illusion, these banks financed Britain's desperate arms race, echoing the Great War's playbook. Post-attack, the U.S. mobilized, and the borrowing frenzy began. War bonds flooded the market. Treasury securities piled high. Morgan banks underwrote issuance after issuance, pocketing fees while factories churned out tanks and planes. The cost? Over $300 billion in today's terms, a debt avalanche that reshaped the global order. Victory in 1945 brought no respite for the lenders. Europe's ruins demanded reconstruction, and America footed the bill through the Marshall Plan, a $13 billion infusion that rebuilt factories and roads, much of it channeled through Morgan-linked channels. It was sold as altruism, but make no mistake, it secured markets for American exports and ensured a steady flow of repayments. The Cold War locked in the cycle. Proxy battles in Korea and Vietnam, financed by Treasury debt that banks like the evolving J.P. Morgan Chase underwrote. Defense contractors got blank checks, interest payments ballooned. Every missile launched, every troop deployed, traced back to a loan, a fee, a profit margin. The Morgan family may have stepped back from the daily grind, but their legacy endures. A fortune pegged at $30 billion, harvested from the interest on wars where young lives paid the ultimate price. Yet the story doesn't end with banks alone. It morphs, inevitably, into the machinery of war itself. The defense giants who turned killing into a business model. Let's pivot to the skies, where innovation meets exploitation in the form of Lockheed Martin. It starts in 1912 with the audacious brothers Allen and Malcolm Lowhead, later anglicized to Lockheed, tinkering in a California shed. Their dream? Conquering the air. By the time World War I roared to life, they were prototyping military aircraft, fragile reconnaissance birds for spotting enemy lines, experimental fighters that hinted at aviation's lethal potential. Contracts were modest, but the brothers saw the horizon. Planes weren't toys, they were the future of dominance. The war's end in 1918 clipped wings industry-wide. Peacetime budgets slashed, and competitors crashed like Icarus. Lockheed teetered, pivoting to civilian models, mail carriers, joyrides for the elite. But they never severed ties with the brass in Washington. Survival meant connections, and they nurtured them like fragile seedlings. Then came the thunder of World War II, the forge that hammered aviation into a cornerstone of power. Aircraft evolved from scouts to saviors. Bombers raining hell, fighters twisting in dogfights, transports hauling the arsenal of democracy. Lockheed surged ahead, delivering the P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine marvel with over 10,000 units rolling off assembly lines. Then the Hudson Bomber, more than 2,800 strong pounding Axis targets. These weren't just machines, they were contracts worth hundreds of millions, injecting lifeblood into the company. But Lockheed's true genius lay not in engineering wizardry, but in the art of entanglement. They didn't just bid on blueprints, they embedded themselves in the system. Former generals joined the boardroom, trading uniforms for suits. Factories sprouted in politically sensitive spots. Georgia's piney woods, California's sun-baked valleys, creating jobs that elected officials couldn't ignore. Untouchable. Absolutely. The Pentagon became a partner, not a client. Post-war, the Cold War's chill winds kept orders cascading. The U-2 spy plane pierced Soviet skies undetected. The SR-71 Blackbird outran missiles like a ghost. The C-130 Hercules hauls cargo to this day, a workhorse born in the 1950s. Decade after decade, Lockheed's playbook remained ruthlessly effective. Promise the stars, lowball the costs, secure the deal. Then, as complexities mount, supply chain snarls, tech glitches, return hat in hand for overruns. Cost-plus contracts were their golden ticket. Cover every expense at a healthy profit slice. Cancellation, political suicide, waste admitted, careers ended. Exhibit A, the C-5 Galaxy, a behemoth transport unveiled in 1965 with a $2.1 billion tag. By rollout, costs had ballooned to $5.3 billion, 150% over. Lockheed bled? Hardly. They recouped every dime plus margins while the Pentagon swallowed pride and checks. Georgia's senators championed it. Jobs flowed like manna. Vietnam's jungles, the Gulf's sands, Afghanistan's mountains, Iraq's deserts, each theater funneled billions Lockheed's way. By the 1990s, consolidation gripped the industry. Giants merged to streamline the feast. Lockheed wed Martin Marietta in 1995, birthing Lockheed Martin, a colossus dominating skies and budgets. Now, why does this saga scream urgency today? In an era of endless conflicts, from drone strikes in the Middle East to cyber skirmishes with superpowers, the military-industrial financial complex hums louder than ever. J.P. Morgan Chase, heir to that banking dynasty, underwrites trillions in U.S. debt, much tied to defense. Lockheed Martin rakes in $60 billion annually. Its F-35 fighter program alone a $1.7 trillion odyssey of overruns. We're not just funding wars, we're addicted to them. Pensions, infrastructure, education, siphoned to sustain this beast. The families behind it all, DuPont's chemical empires fueling munitions. Rockefeller's oil greasing the gears, Morgan's ledgers balancing the books, even politicians like Dick Cheney blurring lines between boardrooms and bunkers, their shadows stretch long. As I stand here, sifting through the archives of ambition and avarice, one truth crystallizes. Wars aren't accidents, they're investments. Soldiers march, economies churn, but the real victors, the lenders and builders who never hear the guns, will we break the cycle or let the dollar sign wave eternally over the flag? The choice is ours, but history whispers it's already been made. What will you do with this revelation? Imagine this. In the shadows of endless American wars, a handful of corporate giants have quietly amassed fortunes that dwarf entire nations' economies. But what if I told you the real cost of conflict isn't just lives and treasure? It's a rigged system where profits skyrocket with every missile fired. Today, we're peeling back the layers on the invisible hand that's fueled our military machine for over a century. And it starts with a name that's become synonymous with sky-high defense spending, Lockheed Martin. We've already traced their rise from the Wright brothers era through Vietnam's jungles and the deserts of the Gulf. By the 90s, as mergers reshaped the battlefield, Lockheed Martin emerged as a colossus. But let's fast forward to the present. In 2023 alone, this behemoth raked in $65 billion in revenue, 90% straight from Uncle Sam's wallet. They're not just building planes, they're the backbone of America's arsenal, dominating a market where competition is as rare as a peaceful headline. Now picture the F-35 Lightning II, the stealth fighter jet that's supposed to be our crown jewel in the skies. When the program kicked off in the early 2000s, the projected price tag was a staggering $233 billion, a sum that already made jaws drop. But here's where the intrigue deepens. Fast forward 2 decades, and the real cost has ballooned to over $1.7 trillion. That's not a typo. Trillion with a capital T. We're talking 7 times the original budget, a black hole of taxpayer dollars sucking in funds like a vortex. Why does it keep escalating? Delays, technical glitches, redesigns, each snag piles on billions. And Lockheed? They're front and center, collecting every penny of those overruns. The Pentagon's locked in. They can't pull the plug. Too much national pride invested. Too many jobs across 45 states hanging in the balance. Senators from both sides fight tooth and nail to keep the gravy train rolling through their districts. It's a web of dependency where canceling means economic Armageddon for voters back home. But don't think the old guard's grip has slipped entirely. Sure, the Lockheed family's direct reins loosened when it went public, but the shareholders, many with deep ties to the establishment, reap the rewards. Watch the pattern. Tensions flare on the global stage, war drums beat, and Lockheed's stock surges like clockwork. Contracts flow, costs spiral, the government foots the bill, and the cycle spins on. It's not chaos, it's choreography, honed over generations. This isn't isolated to the skies, though. Shift your gaze to the ground game where logistics turns battlefields into billion-dollar enterprises. Enter Halliburton, the master of wartime infrastructure, transforming sand and steel into staggering profits. Founded in 1919 by Erastus Halliburton, it started humbly, pumping cement into oil wells, solidifying the black gold rush that powered America's industrial boom. But Erastus, a sharp-eyed Texan, saw beyond the derricks. Infrastructure was king, whether capping gushers or carving out military outposts. In wartime, speed was everything, and he positioned his outfit to deliver just that. World War II was their proving ground. As Allied forces stormed across Europe and the Pacific, Halliburton crews raced to erect airfields, ports, and bases under fire. No frills, no delays, just rapid-fire construction to keep the war machine humming. The formula? Urgency bred opportunity. With enemies at the gates, the military couldn't afford drawn-out bids. Halliburton stepped up with ready rigs and know-how, securing, quote, 3 deals that guaranteed they'd build first and bill later. Peacetime? Mere intermissions. Korea's frozen hills demanded hasty bases. Halliburton delivered, turning mud into runways overnight. But Vietnam, that was the jackpot. Through its subsidiary Brown and Root, acquired in the 60s, Halliburton flooded South Vietnam with roads, docks, and airstrips. Billions in contracts, all funneled without a single competitive auction. Why the fast track? Connections, my friends. George Brown, the co-founder of Brown and Root, wasn't just an engineer. He was a kingmaker in Texas politics. Pouring millions into campaigns, Brown bankrolled Lyndon B. Johnson's ascent from congressman to the White House. LBJ, the ultimate wheeler dealer, owed his empire partly to those donations. Once in power, with Vietnam escalating, the payback was poetic. Massive infrastructure gigs for Brown and Root, shielding troops and supplies in the steamy Delta. Coincidence? In Washington, that's just business. Donations buy access. Access unlocks doors. Doors lead to dollars. It's the quiet currency of power. The 90s revived the playbook with a vengeance. The Gulf War erupted in 1991, and as flames lit the Kuwaiti oil fields, Halliburton mobilized. Dick Cheney, then Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush, greenlit contracts for Saudi bases and Kuwaiti rebuilds. Cheney, a hawk with a financier's eye, knew the stakes. Post-war, he traded his Pentagon badge for Halliburton's corner office in 1995, steering the company through a boom in energy and defense. By 2000, as he eyed the vice presidency alongside George W. Bush, Halliburton's war chest was bulging. Then came the perfect storm: 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq. Halliburton's KBR arm, once Brown and Root, snagged over $40 billion in logistics deals. No bids, of course. The fog of war demanded instant action. They fed troops MREs in the Hindu Kush, hauled fuel across Iraqi sands, erected sprawling bases from Baghdad to Basra. Cost plus pricing? Standard issue. Every expense reimbursed, plus a juicy profit margin baked in, risk-free roulette. Scandals bubbled up inevitably. Pentagon audits uncovered billions in ghost meals, phantom fuel runs, half-built barracks charging full price. Halliburton shrugged. War zones are messy, waste happens. The government? They nodded and wrote more checks. Cheney, now VP, pledged to recuse himself from Halliburton matters. Noble, right? Yet under his watch, from 2003 to 2008, their federal contracts exploded 400%. Stock tripled. His deferred options? Worth millions upon his exit in 2009. It's a revolving door greased by ambition and ambition alone. Execs become insiders. Insiders become players, and when the call to arms sounds, the favors cascade into contracts. Politicians pad their nests, companies swell. We, the public, settle the tab. But this isn't just Halliburton's tale, it's the blueprint etched across our history. Let me connect the dots, pulling back the curtain on all five titans. DuPont, Rockefeller, Morgan, Lockheed, Halliburton. For 150 years, they've danced to the same rhythm, turning strife into fortunes. First, they primed the pump in peacetime. DuPont stockpiled powder mills ready for blasts. Rockefeller cornered oil, fueling any engine of war. Morgan forged banker bonds, lending at premium rates. Lockheed tinkered with prototypes between skirmishes. Halliburton honed its build fast or bust ethos on rigs and runways. When thunder rolled, they were primed. Rivals scrambled. The opener? Snag that inaugural deal. Crisis hits. Civil War rations, World War I shells, Gulf ammo dumps, and urgency trumps process. National security, they say, waving away bids. We need it yesterday. The insiders pounce, cementing their role as the go-to. One foot in the door means the rest follows. Trust, once earned, is a golden ticket. Then the moneymaker. Cost plus contracts. The war profiteer's best friend since Appomattox. Bill your expenses, labor, materials, overruns, and tack on that fixed profit slice. No skin in the game, the government's the gambler. From DuPont's gunpowder windfalls to Lockheed's jet overruns, it shielded them from folly. Costs creep, profit intact, delays drag, reimbursed. It's a safety net woven from policy, ensuring victory for their ledgers. As we hurtle toward today's flashpoints, Ukraine's trenches, Taiwan's straits, endless Middle East tensions, this pattern screams relevance. Defense budgets shatter records, topping $800 billion yearly, with these giants claiming the lion's share. F-35 still guzzle funds. Logistics firms eye new hotspots. Shareholders cheer, politicians posture. But why does it matter now in our hyper-connected age? Because the stakes are existential. Climate crises, cyber wars, AI arms races. Tomorrow's battles won't just drain treasuries, they'll reshape economies. If unchecked, this cycle entrenches inequality, funnels wealth upward, and starves innovation elsewhere. Healthcare crumbles while bombers gleam. Schools falter as bases rise. It's not conspiracy, it's consequence. Reflect on this. These families and firms didn't invent war. They mastered its marketplace. DuPont's heirs, Rockefeller's descendants, Morgan's legacy, Lockheed's lineage, Cheney's network, they remind us war is big business. Breaking the loop demands vigilance. Demand transparency in bids. Cap those profit margins. Close the revolving door. Until then, every conflict whispers the same truth. In the grand ledger of history, peace might be the ultimate disruptor. What side of that equation are we on? The choice is ours, but the clock is ticking. Imagine this. You're watching billions vanish into the ether, funneled straight from your pocket to a handful of corporate titans, all under the banner of national security. But what if I told you it's not an accident? It's a blueprint, etched into the DNA of America's war machine since the days of muskets and cannon fire. Today, I'm pulling back the curtain on the invisible empire that's turned conflict into cold, hard cash, and why your tax dollars are the lifeblood of fortunes that span generations. Let's rewind to the smoke-filled boardrooms of the 19th century, where the seeds of this system were sown. Picture Eleuthère DuPont, the ambitious founder whose family would redefine destruction as a dividend. Back in the early 1800s, as America teetered on the edge of wars that would forge its identity, he spotted the golden opportunity. Supply the arsenal and the nation would owe you its survival. Fast forward through the Civil War, and suddenly, DuPont's explosives aren't just powder kegs. They're profit engines, but this wasn't luck. It was strategy, a playbook refined over centuries by oil barons like John D. Rockefeller and bankers like J.P. Morgan. They didn't just arm the fight. They engineered a system where war became the ultimate business model, immune to peacetime slumps. Now, peel back the layers and you'll see the mechanics at work. Subtle, insidious gears turning in the shadows of Capitol Hill. Take the allure of underbidding. Contractors lowball their pitches to snag the deal, painting visions of sleek jets and invincible ships at bargain prices. But once the ink dries and the gears grind into motion, reality bites. Costs spiral, materials scarcer than expected, timelines stretch like taffy. And here's the twist that keeps the suspense alive. The government foots every overrun. That F-35 fighter, billed as a marvel of modern warfare, ballooned sevenfold beyond its price tag. The Zumwalt destroyer, triple the cost. Littoral combat ships, double. You might think it's bungled engineering, a parade of failures, but dig deeper and the truth emerges like a ghost from the fog. This is deliberate. The initial bid secures the lock. The revisions rake in the windfall. Cancel? Impossible. Sunk costs bind the hands of decision-makers, turning hesitation into endless payouts. Profit swells not from efficiency, but from excess. Every delay a dividend. Every shortfall a score. As the stakes climb, the web tightens. Enter the revolving door, that greased hinge between the Pentagon's war rooms and corporate corner offices. I've traced the paths of retired generals and admirals, men who once greenlit billion-dollar blueprints, now cashing executive checks from the very firms they oversaw. A four-star who rubber-stamped Lockheed's contracts. He's their VP by next quarter. An admiral steering naval builds. He sails straight to the shipyard boardroom. This isn't coincidence, it's calibration. Relationships forged in uniform ensure the contracts flow freely, with regulators who know the game inside out. The door spins so fast it's a blur, locking in loyalty that outlasts any tour of duty. And as these ties deepen, the incentives align. Award the deal today. Harvest the board seat tomorrow. It's a shadow network, pulling strings from the situation room to the C-suite, where public service morphs into private gain. But the plot thickens in the marbled halls of power, where the real alchemy happens. Lobbying, that dark art of influence peddled for pennies on the dollar. Defense giants pour millions into Washington, not just checks to campaigns, but a symphony of seduction. Think tanks bankrolled to whisper war's necessities into policymakers' ears. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, the American Enterprise Institute, they're star-funded by these very players, churning out reports that frame invasion as inevitability. Rewind to 2002, the drumbeat for Iraq growing louder. Who amplified the echoes? Contractors seeding quote _6 through proxies, scripting ads that stoked the fire, even trotting out ex-generals for TV spots preaching preemption. They didn't ignite the war single-handedly, no one's claiming that, but they cultivated the soil, fertilized the frenzy. When the bombs fell, the contracts cascaded. Billions for logistics, rebuilds, endless supply lines. Halliburton, under the watchful eye of figures like Dick Cheney, a politician turned profiteer, scooped up the spoils, turning desert sands into dollar signs. It's a cycle as old as empire. Stoke the conflict, harvest the chaos. Yet the genius, or the gall, lies in diversification, that quiet pivot from battlefield to boardroom. War's windfalls don't evaporate with the ceasefire. They seed empires. DuPont's explosive hauls didn't stay buried in gunpowder. They exploded into a chemical colossus, dyes and plastics paving paths to post-war prosperity. Rockefeller, the oil titan, funneled kerosene fortunes, not just for lamps but for tanks, into banks and vast real estate, his grip tightening on America's veins. J.P. Morgan, his war loans, interest compounding like interest in a thriller, financed railroads and factories in peacetime, building a financial fortress. These families, these companies, they alchemized destruction into dynasties, multi-generational wealth insulated from the ebb of peace, rooted in the roar of artillery. He who arms the storm reaps the calm. Now let's scale this up, because the numbers hit like a gut punch, revealing the enormity of what's been siphoned. Since DuPont's first federal powder deal in 1802, his lineage has pulled in over $50 billion adjusted for inflation's bite. Explosives that echoed from Gettysburg to global hotspots. Rockefeller's fuel empires. More than $100 billion in military sales since 1898, every drop powering the march of mechanized might. Morgan's banking behemoths, at least $75 billion in fees and interest from war bonds alone. Lockheed Martin and its forebears, a staggering $200 billion in aircraft and tech since World War I dogfights. Halliburton, over $60 billion in logistics and builds from 1942 onward. Talliot, $485 billion straight from public coffers documented in ledgers anyone can audit. But that's the tip. The iceberg's shadow includes stock surges, land grabs with war cash, industry spun from battlefield billions. Factor those in, and we're staring at a trillion-dollar shadow economy, taxpayer blood transmuted to private gold. This isn't abstract history, it's the pulse of now, throbbing through today's headlines. Fast forward to 2023. The U.S. Defense tab hits $816 billion, a sum that could rewrite destinies. And who feasts? The Big Five: Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, devour over $200 billion, a quarter of the pie sliced for their plates. The playbook endures. Ex-Pentagon brass in executive suites, lobbyists swarming the Hill, factories sprinkled like breadcrumbs across 45 states for the F-35 alone. It's no accident. It's armor. Senators beholden to jobs in their districts can't slash the program. Defects be damned. 800 and counting, years late, budget in the stratosphere. The pattern DuPont sketched in 1802? It's etched in eternity, profiting companies, padding shareholders, anointing executives, even rewarding politicians with post-term perks. The soldiers in the foxholes, they pay in blood. The taxpayers, you and I, we pay in perpetuity, deficits deferred to our kids. But pause here. Let the weight sink in, because the real outrage brews in what we've forfeited. That $485 billion empire, imagine it unleashed not on destruction but creation. Free college for every eager mind, spanning 2 decades of unlocked potential. High-speed rails threading cities like silver veins, shrinking distances, sparking commerce. Healthcare webs catching the fallen, infrastructure mending the fractures of forgotten towns. Instead, we've subsidized a machine that grinds on, wars or whispers of them perpetuating the profit loop. As I stand at this crossroads of history and ledger, one truth haunts. We've let a system born of necessity evolve into a beast of avarice. The question isn't just how it started, it's how we stop it. Will we? Or will the next contract, the next conflict, claim another trillion from tomorrow's dreams? The choice, my friends, is ours, if we dare to seize it. Imagine pouring that same fortune, $485 billion, into something that could heal a nation from the inside out. Universal health care for an entire decade, covering every citizen from cradle to grave, erasing medical debt that cripples families today. Or picture it resurrecting America's crumbling infrastructure, every bridge reinforced, every highway repaved, turning our aging roads into a seamless web of progress that moves people and goods faster, safer, more efficiently. And what about the quiet killers? Funding cancer research not just for a few years, but for a full century, unleashing breakthroughs that could save millions of lives lost too soon. But no, that money vanished into the black hole of endless conflict. Explosives that shattered lives, fuel that powered machines of destruction, weapons that claimed souls on distant battlefields, logistics chains that fed the frenzy. Some of those wars, they had to be fought, echoes of necessity in the fog of history. World War II stands as a grim testament, a fight against tyranny that no one with a conscience could deny. Yet even in those righteous struggles, shadows lurked. Profiteers circled like vultures, turning sacrifice into spreadsheets. I've spent years digging through the archives, piecing together the threads of American might and the fortunes it forged. And what I've uncovered isn't just history. It's a blueprint for how power endures. Let me take you deeper, because the real story isn't in the battles won or lost. It's in the boardrooms where decisions were made long before the first shot rang out. Flash back to the smoke-filled rooms of the early 20th century. There I was, poring over yellowed documents in a dimly lit library when the name DuPont jumped out like a ghost from the past. He, Pierre S. DuPont, the iron-willed founder who transformed a family powder mill into an empire, saw the winds of war shifting as early as the 1910s. Europe was fracturing, alliances crumbling, and while diplomats argued, he positioned his company at the heart of it all. DuPont's explosives didn't just win wars, they redefined them. Contracts flowed in for smokeless powder, for bombs that could level cities. Costs ballooned, overruns hidden in fine print, but the payouts? Astronomical. By the end of World War I, DuPont's revenues had exploded tenfold, turning a modest concern into a colossus. But here's where it gets chilling. Investigations followed, whispers of monopoly in the munitions trade during the 1930s. Antitrust suits piled up, accusations of price gouging that could have toppled lesser men. Yet nothing stuck. No cuffs, no indictments. The family walked away unscathed, their wealth ballooning into billions, their grip on the industry ironclad. Why? Because the gears of war don't turn without them. The military needed DuPont's fire. The economy leaned on their jobs. Untouchable. That's the first thread in this tapestry. Now shift your gaze to the oil fields of Pennsylvania, where another titan rose from the muck. John D. Rockefeller, the cunning oil baron whose Standard Oil choked the life out of competitors, sensed the thirst for black gold long before the world wars quenched it. As tensions brewed in 1914, his refineries hummed, supplying the fuel that kept armies marching. World War I was a bonanza. Standard's tankers crossed oceans, profits gushing like crude. They overcharged, sure. Government probes confirmed it, but the fines? Mere slaps on the wrist, pennies against the tide of earnings. Break up the monopoly? They did in 1911, shattering Standard into pieces. But watch this sleight of hand. The Rockefeller family never lost control. Shares shuffled, alliances reformed, and over decades those fragments recombined into today's behemoths. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron still pumping war-fueled wealth. World War II, same playbook. Fuel for the Allies, logistics for the fight. Post-war, it was Korea, Vietnam, every conflict a refill at the pump. The pattern etched itself: position early, secure the contracts, watch the overruns multiply. And when the smoke cleared, no one from the top echelons faced the music. The family endured, their legacy a river of oil money that lubricated American power. But Rockefeller wasn't alone in this dance. Enter J.P. Morgan. He, the legendary banker whose House of Morgan financed not just industries but empires. In the shadow of World War I, his firm orchestrated the loans that armed the Allies, turning debt into dominance. Submarine warfare raged. Trenches swallowed men, but Morgan's vaults overflowed. Accusations flew after the armistice. War profiteering. Insider deals that fattened banks while soldiers starved. Congress grilled them. Hearings echoed through Washington. Yet the verdicts? Acquittals, or worse, nothing at all. No prosecutions pierced the veil. Morgan's banks emerged stronger, funding the next round. The build-up to World War II, the loans for Liberty ships, the invisible hand steering the economy through chaos. I've traced these lines through ledgers and letters, feeling the weight of what they hid. It's not paranoia, it's public record, contracts stamped and filed away. But the escalation, that's where the suspense builds, where the true cost unfurls like a nightmare you can't wake from. Fast forward to the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of Iraq, the mountains of Afghanistan. The script flips, but the authors stay the same. Take Halliburton. No family dynasty here, but Dick Cheney, the steely politician who climbed from its ranks to the vice presidency, embodied the shift. As the 1990s dawned, whispers of regime change in the Middle East grew louder. Cheney, with his boardroom polish, had already steered Halliburton into the big leagues, securing no-bid deals for oil well fires in Kuwait after the Gulf War. Billions in contracts, overruns that defied logic, charging for meals never cooked, fuel marked up 300%. Then, 2003. Iraq. The invasion sold on dossiers of doom, weapons of mass destruction that never materialized, intelligence tainted by think tanks bankrolled by the very contractors poised to profit. Halliburton got the nod. $7 billion for logistics, reconstruction, the works. They rebuilt what bombs broke, pocketing fees on the destruction they enabled. Afghanistan, a 20-year quagmire, $2 trillion down the drain with Halliburton and kin raking in billions for bases, supplies, endless extensions. Lobbyists swarmed Capitol Hill, contracts renewed despite audits screaming fraud. Overcharging? Check. Kickbacks? Documented? But prosecutions? A token fine in 2009, $550 million, laughable against the Hall. Cheney? Untouched, retiring to a life of lectures and legacy. And Lockheed Martin? The aerospace giant, heir to the war machine's evolution, bribes to foreign officials in the 1990s, $200 million in slush funds to peddle fighter jets worldwide. Investigations roared, FBI stings, congressional fury, fines levied, yes, hundreds of millions, but executives? Not a single night in jail. The company thrived. F-35 programs ballooned to $1.7 trillion, overruns baked in, lobbyists ensuring the Pentagon's addiction. These aren't isolated sins. They're a symphony. 5 bloodlines, 5 empires, DuPont's powder, Rockefeller's oil, Morgan's finance, Cheney's logistics, Lockheed's wings. Every major American war since the 1860s, positioned pre-conflict, contracts locked, costs inflated, regulators co-opted, lobbies pushing for more. World War I, profits soared 1,000%. World War II, DuPont's net worth tripled. Korea, Vietnam, oil and arms flowed. Iraq, Afghanistan, trillions funneled through private hands. Why does this matter now as I speak these words in 2023? Because the pattern isn't buried in history's dust. It's alive, pulsing in today's headlines. Ukraine aid? $100 billion and counting, with Lockheed's missiles and Raytheon systems leading the charge. Middle East tensions? Fuel prices spike? Halliburton heirs drill deeper? Defense budgets swell to $800 billion annually, more than the next 10 nations combined. We're on the brink of new frontiers, cyber wars, space races, where these same players bid for the stars. The implications cascade like dominoes. That $485 billion I mentioned earlier, it's a sliver of the total war tab since 2001 alone, over $8 trillion per Brown University's tallies. Diverted from healthcare, education, climate fixes, soldiers die not for glory but for margins. Economies warp around military Keynesianism, jobs in swing states buying silence from Congress, and the public, distracted by algorithms, polarized by ads from the very PACs these profits fund. I've stood in the National Archives, felt the chill of those contracts under fluorescent lights. This isn't theory, it's the ledger of loss. Wars prolonged, Vietnam dragged by contractor pleas, Iraq ignited on fabricated flames, Afghanistan a graveyard of good intentions twisted for gain. Not all conflicts were born of greed, but greed ensured they outlasted necessity. So, as the sun sets on another cycle, I ask you, will it stop? History whispers no. These families, these companies, they're woven into the fabric. Too vital to jail, too entrenched to uproot. Politicians owe them elections, the Pentagon supply lines, we, the illusion of security. Billions amassed on the bones of millions, a business model masked as patriotism. If this revelation stirs something in you, if it cracks open the vault on how power truly operates, then pause. Reflect. We've paid the price too long. Subscribe, because the next chapter, it's about breaking the cycle. They won't teach this in textbooks where wars are heroes' tales and companies mere supporters. But the records don't lie. 5 families. Every war, the same inexorable profit. We bleed. They build empires until we demand otherwise.